You should now have a basic understanding of perspective, but there are still a lot of techniques and concepts left to cover. When we are drawing in perspective, we are dealing with a three-dimensional space, and everything we place within that space will have dimensions. Whether or not these are accurately specified and measured to a scale, it's important to consider the size of what it is you are drawing and its relationship to other elements. There are suitable techniques and methods for working to a measured scale in perspective, but we will look at them in a later video. Most of the time when you are drawing, you are judging the dimensions of everything in comparison to each other. If I draw a house, for instance, and then place a car next to it, I know that the car will have to be drawn smaller than the house because, well, you found me a car that's bigger than a house. If I was to draw another house further in the distance, I know that this would reduce in scale and appear a lot smaller. We will be taking a more in-depth look at how to accurately scale objects in perspective in a later video, but this was an example of how we should consider the dimensions of everything in our drawing if we want them to appear convincing. So what we are going to do now is we are going to run through some various techniques that will assist you in being able to accurately divide and duplicate dimensions. To make this easier to follow, I will show you these techniques through orthographic examples first, and then next to it I will repeat them in perspective. So let's start by looking at division. Let's draw a simple rectangle and then draw one in perspective. If you want to find the center point, you can draw some diagonals by connecting the opposite corners. To divide the rectangle in half, draw a vertical line through the intersection point of the two diagonals. The same could be done horizontally. In perspective, this line would also appear to be converging to the vanishing point. You can continue to divide this rectangle further by repeating this technique within the subdivisions. So that is a simple way of dividing. Now let's take a look at duplicating. Again, let's draw out a rectangle. I need to give these some room because I'm going to duplicate another rectangle next to them. This rectangle in perspective is converging towards the vanishing points. Seeing as the height will stay the same, I just extend those lines towards that direction. I'm going to repeat the previous techniques to find the center point of these rectangles and draw a line at that halfway point. Now to duplicate the dimension, I simply draw a line from the far corner of the rectangle through the halfway point until it meets the extended line. At this point, I can then draw another vertical and I have successfully duplicated the rectangle. This can be seen more clearly in perspective. Notice how the duplicated rectangle appears smaller because of it converging further into the distance, and this technique can be repeated to duplicate more rectangles. You'll find yourself relying on these techniques a lot when constructing objects in perspective. A good way to practice is to build boxes on top of each other. Draw through these so you can see all of the edges. Remember that these boxes can be used as the framework for constructing more complex objects. So now jumping back to dividing, let's take a look at how to divide into odd numbers. For this example, I will place the horizon line across the center and draw in the rectangle. If I want to divide this rectangle into 5 separate sections, I could just have a close guess, but it's likely going to be off. Therefore, I can use a more accurate technique to do this. This involves drawing a line which is parallel to the horizon line, starting from the front edge of the rectangle. I then divide this horizontal line into 5 sections. From the point of this last division, I take a line through the other edge of the rectangle and extend this until it meets the horizon line. This has created a new point, and I can take a line from each of these other divisions through the rectangle until it meets this new point on the horizon line. Now that I have points for these 5 divisions, I can draw in the vertical lines and separate this rectangle into 5 sections. To conclude this episode, I'm going to build on this example and demonstrate some of the techniques that we have taken a look at in this video. I also want to give credit and specify some source material that presented these techniques, notably Scott Robertson's How to Draw book, which includes useful techniques and examples for drawing in perspective. I have a link in the description to all of my equipment and resources. With that being said, I hope you are enjoying this series on perspective. I will be uploading a real-time version of this example onto the Patreon page, so do consider checking that out if you are interested. I also have some other content on there.